How important is it that your players are creative when it comes to them solving problems and dealing with the conflicts that you're throwing at them?
Personally, in my games, like, I like to have more creative players than not, because a few different things. If you have creative people at your table, the DM has more freedom to do more maybe crazy or creative or critical thinking things in their game. You can put in more puzzles, and you can put in more traps, you can put in more riddles because of these people that think outside of the box. With less creative people, it's going to be more on you. In my games, I have some creative people. When I come up with, I have a plot in mind, and they go to tackle it, and then I start hearing them pop off these theories. Hey, you know what? I bet it's this guy over here who's actually one of these. I'm like, you know what? That's not it, but it is now.
Yeah, it wasn't. That's better than when I came up with. I like that.
Exactly.
Ooh, that's nice. Yeah.
The creative players at your table will inadvertently hand you better solutions to your problems than you had originally planned.
And then when they find out they were right, that they called it, 6 sessions ago, when in reality you just said, ooh, I'm gonna write that down 6 sessions ago, and they're gonna feel much more satisfied, especially if they're the kind of player who's trying to kind of unravel and unwind these sorts of complex situations and scenarios or whatever. I think that's a really good strategy, is finding your players who come up with theories that are totally off the wall and may not be, there's a half assumption in there, but it sounds good, and you're not carved in stone or leading into whatever else it is that you had already established. Like, let them come up with ideas for you. Steal away. It only helps. They just feel smarter then, and it makes your game better if you come up with something, or somebody proposes an idea and you're like, that actually fits better than the explanation. If you don't use it just because they came up with it, then it's a lame reason to not improve your story, I guess.
Use the creativeness of your players. I actually know a couple of DMs that have told me that in their games, when they create these puzzles and these traps for their players, they don't actually create the solution when they create the puzzles.
Riddles, that is, absolutely.
They don't make the solution. What they do is they allow their players to find out what it is and to go through it, and they start trying to solve it, and then they're like, the first one that sounds really good, that's it, because they don't want to lock them in there.
You got to let them be successful by thinking outside the box. Otherwise, you're going to make your players not feel like it benefits them, and they're just going to try and do the obvious thing every single time because that's the right answer. And I think that actually cuts both ways against both creative and those players who aren't so much, because the creative players are going to find, like I said, an extra 10 explanations that have nothing to do with the actually important details that you've dropped in, but are fixated on some random extra descriptive sentence you threw in just because you were working for thinking space or something. But they're like, oh man, his cloak's way too purple, he's got to be a noble or something. So now all of a sudden they're doing an entirely different thing than they came into that bar for originally.
And that does make a point for that side of it. If you have a table that is slapped full of these hyper creative thinking players, then they're gonna likely overanalyze a lot of stuff that you don't really intend for them to. So table full of these people, and you just go to describing the few patrons at the bar, all of a sudden every one of them is like, all right, maybe that guy's the big bad, all right, maybe that guy's an evil wizard that we got to talk to, maybe that, like you probably need some people on the other end of the spectrum to be like, hey guys, maybe they're just here chilling. It doesn't matter.
Chill out.
Let's just move on, guys.
They haven't even looked at us. Like, it's probably not plot critical.
You do have another aspect, maybe a little more a niche type thing, whereas you may have, let's say, a really creative thinking player, but he's playing a not very observational character. So they're not going to use that knowledge. They're not going to apply their critical thinking at your table. Yeah, they're critical thinking, they're creative, but their character is not. So you're not going to get the boon of that.
That's another thing that, if you've got somebody in there that you're like, oh yeah, they always see this stuff, but they're playing a dunce version of whatever they usually play or something, so that they get to stretch themselves as a role player. You may not get to the benefit of their normal behavior based on the character that they're acting on. That is a really good point.
Exactly.